such an odd one. I'm trying to think of how to frame this as something worth you hearing. What words I can say that won't make your face recede inside your brain. I like it very much, but I don't want to tell you it's a masterpiece, or an underrated gem, or a galaxy-brained bit of Guido! I just haven't found the discussion around the movie getting into what makes it interesting. A loud popcorn monster mash, that's also a commentary on the futility of conflict. You might already find that hard to swallow, given it stars a big stinky ape, and that's foolish. I was dragged to the cinema for this one despite my protests of extreme indifference because, you know, so many things were coming back, and this was talking about being part of a Western kaiju cinematic universe. What can I say? A brave decision in this day and age. On top of that, reception had already cooled off on the first movie in that plan, 2014's Godzilla, which, yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of. I liked that Bryan Cranston was in it, and then he died. I never bought into the whole, oh look, he's gonna save us all angle. I don't normally look at a giant dinosaur and think, oh, there he goes, humanity's last hope. Sure know whose side I'm on. Launch the missile now! I'll admit, I'm not the biggest fan of Godzilla anyway. I just don't trust him. I hear the original and a few other movies address exactly this. They show Gojira as a force of territorial retribution, and I'm sure I'll get around to them one day when I'm not too busy. Kong is my king, because there's no attempt to moralize Kong, and that's still very striking in his legendary debut. The humans go through their trials and tribs, but Kong, animated by Willis O'Brien, is a simple creature, untamed by logic or reason, with no greater plan. The way he tears at this Rex and then idly toys with its corpse. His interest in Fay Wray, like Kong, you can't do that. No, wait, no, not on the matte screen, we just invented that. Kong was man's attempt to tame the untamable, and while some might turn their nose up at this because it doesn't have the most ultra 4K amazing depth of field crane shot into the tiniest detail of an atom, it's always been an important movie before it was made into a boring movie. So, my arrogant assumption was, they can't do this again. Hollywood's just gonna grab Kong for another rehash to shove his copyright back into view, only that's not the case. That night, in the cinema, me and the boys, we went on a wild journey with a film that was not simply Kong again, but a new look at the Hollywood legend, through the eyes of the Vietnam War. On the face of it, this seems like a basic monster movie. A ragtag team of expert civilians and soldiers led by hack filmmaker Mike Stoklasser, taking what they think is a tricky path into the jungle for a science trip, only to discover they've been goofed. Ah yes, his true goal, to film the elusive Rich Evans bumbling in the jungle. Such a Mike way to cause misery.
How long does it take to put a glove on?
Mike! Shut up! And let me take my time getting this glove on for your stupid Monkey Man project!
Gorilla Interrupted 2 focuses more on the humans, like the Godzilla film, but their connections to Kong and the island are more complex. Transparently, a discussion of America's involvement in Vietnam. I can only assume this came about because someone in a meeting said Viet Cong, and they were laughing too hard to say no. Otherwise, I have to believe it started with a scriptwriter who wanted to take inspiration from Apocalypse Now as a starting point, then handed to a director who was way into that angle and obsessed with video games, resulting in an incredibly cheeky remix, involving a bunch of new flavors which, yes, aren't subtle, but aren't thoughtless. The inspirations reach beyond Apocalypse Now, from Treasure Island to Metal Gear and everything in between. I feel like Atlantis is playing a role here too, you know? Some of the changes feel inevitable. Kong himself is, bigger now, allegedly only because he has to, roll the eyes, fight Godzilla, again. But he feels pretty true to the spirit of his debut, less recognisably emotive with Andy Serkis crawling inside him, and more, vacant, more likely to respond to bananas than hugs. Having said that, Jordan Roberts made a point of talking about how they wanted Kong's stylization to skew towards creature, visually beyond the basis of an ape or human, using that to also stress his desire to draw from the original movie, which I definitely see in more than just Kong. Underneath the many adjustments, I was surprised how much the first movie still matters to this one. Moments, characters, and imagery that now serve almost reverse purposes. The wall, the chains, the pilot fights, as well as the film's main threat, a background monster from the original feature with, why not, some Pokemon influence thrown in, yeah, alright. Even the opening takes us back to the original's time frame, shot like it's in a bathtub, and boy does be like him a Dutch angle zoom. I might have screamed. While I'm all for this, I get why others wouldn't have pushed it so far. It's not hard to see why people go from finding it fun to outright silly. This is literally only here because he's testing out for a Metal Gear movie, the jammy sod. It's barely digestible. There's madness almost tailor-made for obnoxious internet critics to point and scream at, perhaps anticipated.
Most contemporary blockbuster Ghostbusters have too many characters, and most of them should have been cut or consolidated. But hey, I'm the director, that's on me.
They do this, they do that. Kong's got his own Batman origin. I'm not kidding. You can you can pay your respects at Kong Alley. I don't. Sure, we can isolate a lot of nonsense, but that would be ignoring what else it says and how it's said. This is far from stupid. In fact, the absurdity and pointedness of the humour, such heavy implications undercut by massive whoopsies, the lack of emotional lucidity is too consistent to be an accident, especially when you cast Steve Brule as the exposition guy. You know what that gives us.
Ants. Sounds like a bird, but it's a fucking ant.
Skull Island best reflects the nature of Kong. Incomprehensible in his manner, unreachable, pulling you in with the idea that you should care, and then squashing it.
He's an old wobbly guy. He needs some new bones.
That's precisely what makes it so damn interesting. The great emotional distance between the audience and the characters, who it refuses to let us get too cozy with. We're given the scope of the split in the culture, between the civilians calling for peace and the vets unable to put the horror behind them. And unlike the people on screen, we're pushed back and made to observe both with almost equal weight. Nobody's entirely wrong here. Nobody's entirely right, either.
Lost us support back home.
You're not actually gonna blame the people without guns for losing the war, are you?
Camera's way more dangerous than a gun. And we didn't lose the war. We abandoned it.
Right.
Kong's furious encounter with them early on splits the parties on the island, rather conveniently between mostly civvies and the vets, and what they experience is directly compared in front of us. Oh, such a majestic creature. I wish to stroke it and be happy about the world. It's such a cutie. Let's all go to the zoo. I can't get a shot! Two scenes right up against each other, and the feelings they stir up are mixed. Laughing at the hubris of these mortals, but also showing the gap in their realities. It's incredibly fair, while telling us that things are entirely unfair.
You're a good group of boys to die with, I'll tell you that much. You should have come here.
There's a strong undercurrent of nihilism running throughout the whole picture, especially with the characters getting fragged mercilessly. Most deaths in movies like this are there for a reason. It's basic plot maths. The character has done something to warrant getting killed, or have an expendable enough personality to serve a greater purpose. If you're not an extra, they're probably making a point of it. Now, that's all pretty obvious, but I bring it up because sometimes it can feel incredibly unbalanced if that isn't well punctuated. Like if a character's unlikability is sort of background, only for them to suddenly get a full 5 minutes of gratuitous torture. Like, wow, you're pulling them out like this to make a point? Maybe that is the point. Maybe you are smart. Maybe this is a commentary on how we can never perfectly recreate the success of the past, because there's... Yeah, sorry. There's an equal lack of balance to the frequent deaths in Skull Island, but the difference is that this feels noticeably to a consistent point about the nature of death in conflict, and some of it is funny. Like, the early deaths are played for laughs, even if just to thin us down to our main cast, again, an Atlantis trick. Less extras to animate, but that then continues with important characters as if a whole page is missing. Goodman suddenly eviscerated and reduced to a great set-piece gag involving a camera to save our heroes. Chief Dooley making a big speech and sacrificing his life to save the others for nothing, again. This one guy who had a single line where he vaguely kvetched about his desk job, and didn't do anything else worth thinking about. You see a giant eraser come out of the sky and violently remove him from the script and tear out the fucking page. Even the one death that actually motivates some of the characters is abrupt and misappropriated. The whole thing feels hollow, like some great absurd joke that has a very serious, messed up punchline, and I think you see where this is going.
We just got taken down by a monkey the size of a building.
Yeah. That was an unconventional encounter.
The giant ape is the representation of the Vietnam conflict in the hearts of all these characters and how they're coping, the new face of their personal trauma. Many troops found themselves haunted by a war they were beginning to feel was a lie, and the country did not accept them the way they had in World War II, with civilian protesters reeling over news from abroad. I imagine you know most of the story. The mental scars were deep, and in this case are the sad truth behind the nonsense, why so many of them fall back into maneuvers with such gusto, especially the boss. Sam Jackson is still in Nam, mentally, and has finally, at his most Ahab, found the one thing that can replace the war he never won. Of course he's not making a rational choice. The movie tells you so, in the most blindingly obvious way possible. It is a joke. It's a cosmic joke. An incredibly bittersweet joke. Yeah, credit to my sister for saying that this was good business energy. I know exactly what she means. I would have come up with that myself if I wasn't paying attention to another part of that movie.
Fish people.
Everyone's missing something that they think has manifested in Kong's presence, but for a lot of them, there's no greater reward. One of the original screenwriters said his plan was for the Larson and Hiddleston characters to have an emotional awakening, that knowing Kong would ignite a new passion in them, and I don't think that would have given the picture the great depth he thought it might. In fact, I think it actively detracts from what makes it work. Both are empathetic, but neither are totally likable. Hiddleston and Larson both remain pretty guarded throughout, and if anything, the Kong experience seems to humble them, make them realize there are bigger forces at play, that maybe the best result is just to stay alive. Even the connections they manage to make with Kong feel short-term, and less overdone. Like, this is less endearing than you think.
Hey, look, it's some kids on the ice. What's a dinosaur to do when there's kids on the ice? Quick! Somebody call their mom!
The Islanders may have anthropomorphized him to a comical degree, but he doesn't come across as a kindly guardian of greater intelligence, instead set off by any offense, and if the ending's anything to go by, that's not done anytime soon. But there is one guy who does get out of this just fine. Steve Brule wins by virtue of not playing the game, a man out of time, out of place to the rest of the world on screen, just like the audience, only on the opposite end of the timeline, and also like us is very aware of the, air quotes, legend of Kong. The others all hold on to personal conflicts and views of either side, but he put that away long ago, becoming great friends with his enemy. All he wants is for the smashy yelly ape stuff to be done, and only gets involved in the plot because he sees a way back to what he knows best.
You are more beautiful than a hot dog and a beer at Wrigley Field on opening day.
I think that speaks to Kong's awareness of what it is, the kind of movie it is, and what comes of the conflicts of such stories. Watching these climactic struggles between forces that will never see eye to eye, and knowing that all you can do is leave it behind for your own reality. Do what makes sense for you. Real big think here for your cinematic universe slop, eh? Who needs a video on Kubrick, the hack? 2001 A Space Armageddon sucks! I do try to give these things a fair shake, and sure, I don't think Skull Island is brilliant. A lot of other films I'd put before this one, believe me. But I think it's way higher on the thoughtfulness scale than it might have been. Around the same 5-year interval, we got a couple of weirdly similar old-school action force flicks that kinda put me in the same Venn diagram of a mood. The Independence Day sequel, that's also a big crashy load of fun with a huge ensemble cast. They made an effort to put in some stuff that made my northern friend go, aye, there's some top world building in here, great characters, you know. But it's with the best will in the world, not the smartest movie. It's not saying anything greater than humanity united will kill everything that says boo. And the doofiness is not, I mean, you're welcome to find a reading if you can bend yourself out of a crease. Oy vey, my David, I gotta find my David, where's my David? No! No, Mom! No! Then you've got Overlord, which is a 10 out of 10 piece of filmmaking. Wacko, but with a very simple, extremely well-told story, barely an ounce of fat in view. In those sweepstakes, Kong, Fun Island, is in the middle. But the stuff it has going for it is interesting enough to stick with me. That's the valuable part. For a movie so hung up on nihilism, it's actually, and maybe this is the point, rather life-affirming. That this kind of thought can be brought to a modern monster movie. That maybe we're not entirely bereft of interesting giant stomp men pictures yet. The value is always in whatever you make of what's in front of you, and now this part of me trying to explain myself is taking up way too much of the video. I don't know if I've argued this the way that I wanted to, but I haven't gone too in-depth on all the ways it's a big cornball romp, because frankly it's not what I think about when I think about this movie. I didn't think I'd ever want to do a video, but there's too much I've taken from it now living in my brain that I can't ignore, and maybe it can take some of yours now too. Even if it's just, oh, that looks like a fun time, even if it's just, oh, you saw something here that maybe doesn't seem like I'm stretching for the moon, even if it's just, hey, that Metal Gear movie might actually be sick. All of that seems to go with the movie's sideways look at our futile endeavors in conflict. I feel the same is true of the original movie. Spoilers for the last couple decades of movie history, I guess. Kong takes a dive, and this gentleman sums up the great tragedy in one of Hollywood's most iconic lines. It was just too funny to keep his balance. You see, he becomes a pickle. Thanks, guys. A very weird subject for me to choose, I know. I'd like to thank all my patrons for helping me out in a very weird time. I need to keep pumping stuff out, and here it is. They're keeping me going, they're keeping the work happening, and I can't wait to get back to even more videos and big projects on the horizon, so thank you, all you fellows. Here's other links for things I do. I'm gonna turn off the recording now because it is, what, 5 AM?
I'm gonna stab you by the end of the night.
Really?
Just kidding.